Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this African Tourism Forum webinar with Fred Schouwink, a psychologist who specializes in trauma, loss, and bereavement. My name is Natalia, and I'll be moderating today's session. When COVID first hit our shores, I read a very interesting article about how what we were all feeling at the time was grief. I was too busy to give it much thought, but as the situation has evolved over the better part of 6 weeks, what I can say now is that a good part of my brain feels a little bit like cotton wool, and it's been filled with COVID-19 stuff, whether that's grief, anxiety, anger, desperation, sadness. Sometimes I can't even put my finger on it, and sometimes it changes by the hour. So I'm very pleased that today we have an expert that can help us put a name to it and also help us through this experience of loss and how to cope with it. Just before I kick off, and if you haven't used the Zoom platform before, you've probably been hiding under a rock because it's really the only way we can communicate with each other at the moment. But we'd love to get your questions. So if you want to pose a question to Fred, all you need to do is click on the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A folder. Type your question that will come through to me, and I will pose them to Fred after he's done his presentation. I'd also love for you to use the chat. Again, there's a bubble. You just click on the chat bubble to communicate with your fellow attendees. And perhaps we'll kick off by asking where you're all connecting from today. So click on your chat to let us know where you're connecting from. I'm connecting from Malmesbury in the Western Cape. It's looking a little bit muggy outside, but I'd love to see where you're all from. So please click on the chat and let us know where you're from. We're also recording this webinar, so we'll make it available to you afterwards if you'd like to share it. And again, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so throughout the session. Just click on your Q&A folder and off we go. So with that done, I'd like to hand over to Fred now, who's going to share his insights and share his screen. Fred, the floor is yours. Please share your screen.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And thank you for this opportunity to share this afternoon with you, talking about, I think, a topic that is most relevant considering the times in which we're at. It's a heavy topic, talking about loss and grief. This is something that I work with a lot with families. I also do a lot of research in this area. And just listening to my clients, my students, family, friends speak about how they've been feeling over the last couple of weeks, I hear words like feeling tired, confused, sad, irritable. And really for me, the underlying feeling there is just a very deep sense of loss at the end of the day. And that is what I would like to normalize today as we talk about this topic. So this is a symbol that I think most people are familiar with, the whole idea of yin and yang. And really in the context of where we are today, it is saying that within crisis, there is always opportunity. And we have to always keep that in mind. We have to hold on to that hope that this COVID-19, it had a beginning, there will be a middle, and there will be an end. And as we work through our emotional loss, to just hold on to that idea that there is an ending to this, hopefully, soon. So loss happens on so many different levels. And this is the big idea that I want to talk about today. I'm thinking, when I speak about loss, a lot of people often go to the idea that loss is the physical death or loss of loved ones. And that's certainly a part of the experience. But interestingly enough, that's the thing that I'm going to speak least about today is physical death, but loss on a much deeper level. And I think if we think about where we are at in the world, we are all dealing with this collective loss of the world that we knew. We hear words such as the loss of the normal, that we're now in the new normal. And I think I would like to speak about that today, to give it some voice and words. So if we think about the journey on which we're at the moment, it is really at sea, metaphorically speaking, with all its storms, etc. And we certainly are all in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat and we don't have the same paddles. So I'm very aware that as I'm speaking about this topic today, that people have different experiences. And I invite our attendees today to take what is useful for them, but also to acknowledge that everyone will have a different experience of loss, depending on your life experience, depending on your personality, depending on your resources that you have. So we all do have a unique experience, but I'm going to really speak about the collective experience of going through the loss that we are currently experiencing. So a lot of people, I'm thinking about the lockdown tonight. It's a very important night. We know that President Ramaphosa will be speaking about lockdown and where we're heading in the future, and the staggered approach that a lot of people are talking about. And really the feeling that so many of us are sitting with is, can we just get through this? We want that ending. This must come to an end. And that creates a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety. The truth of the matter is, if we are looking at all the signs that we have available today, is that this is not a speedboat that we're going to get through. It's more a long journey that we are going to take. And I think that's the hard part that we have to grapple with, that this COVID-19 is not just going to disappear overnight. And I think if we're going to go on a journey, a longer journey, you need to be prepared for it. So, and that's why I'm so appreciative of you actually creating this platform, Natalia, where we can talk about the psychology, the emotional side of things. Because, if you are going to encounter these psychological storms that we are talking about, often, I think the big worry in the industry, in the tourism industry certainly, and many industries, is the financial aspects. And I certainly want to acknowledge that. I know there's a lot of anxiety around that, uncertainty, not just in terms of the sustainability of businesses, but also of staff, etc. So let's acknowledge we all are experiencing that worry. But getting through this COVID-19 storm is more than just finances. We also have to prepare ourselves for the emotional impact, the psychological, our mental health. Other aspects are our physical health. Mind and body isn't separate stuff. It's all one thing. And I think now being in lockdown, certainly we're not being able to move as much as we used to. It does have an impact on our physical being. So I'll talk a bit about that towards the end of today as well. Our connections with other people. If all my research and all my work has taught me one thing in life, if we had to really boil it down to the most essential parts, it's relationships matter. It's relationships that get us through the difficult storms. And we have to now negotiate a new way of connecting with those around us. There's the spiritual and the ethical part, our religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, whatever that might be for you, that can carry us through. And then also our family and home life. And we've been speaking, Natalia, just before our recording today, about how all these roles are all of a sudden in one place, and it's so difficult to manage. I think certainly it's for many people, it's not less work. There's actually more to do. You have to parent, you have to be a partner to someone, you have to email, voice call, all these things in one place. So it is a difficult space to navigate. But let's look at ourselves holistically. And today, this is what I can bring as a psychologist. It's just some insight around the psychological preparation that is going to be important. So when we are talking about loss, as I mentioned, we tend to think it's just, when a person physically, we die and we lose someone like that. But there are some other losses that I want to speak about today and also give a voice to understand what we are going through. Grief and loss, there are so many feelings that I can talk about that people experience, from anger, the sadness, irritability, numbness. But there's also the physical aspect of grief and loss, that tiredness. And I think what a lot of people under stress would say is, my concentration is going. I really find it hard to focus. You use such a beautiful metaphor. It's like cotton wool in your head. And I think that's a very apt description of it. But if we look at loss, there actually is a time aspect here. there's the past losses that we need to consider that actually influence in a significant way what we are experiencing in the present. There are the losses that we are dealing with in the moment, and there's also the future losses that we are anticipating. So I just want to spend a few moments talking about that, and we can see if there's maybe some questions after that. So just talking about the past losses, this refers to ambiguous loss, and that might be someone that you've lost due to death. But I also want to invite people to think about other losses that we don't often acknowledge. Loss like divorce, the abandonment of a parent, childhood or parental illness, financial upheaval in our earlier years, constant moving around, growing up with parental addiction, miscarriages, abortion. All these refer to ambiguous loss. And so often we actually don't acknowledge it for what it is. And what do these losses bring us? They often blindside us, that we feel helpless with it, trapped, scared, unsafe. And therefore, we need to acknowledge that a situation like this, in which we are finding ourselves at the moment, can so often trigger unresolved loss from the past. And what I'm here to say today is that these losses and the associated feelings, it has to be felt, it has to be seen, it has to be accepted, understood, and resolved. So a lot of what people are feeling now might have very well been triggered by these past losses. What are we dealing with in the present at the moment? We are dealing with a lot of loss in the sense of routine, our daily lives, getting up, going to work, losing the ability to worship like we used to, having lunch with our colleagues and our friends, interacting with our customers, going to gym, celebrating weddings. It's so sad to hear all these weddings that have to be cancelled and graduations that are cancelled. And people are sitting with a lot of questions. Do I now need to wear a mask when I go out? Will there be equipment if I do get ill? Will I be able to weather this? Is this virus spreading amongst me? Is this virus in my nose? So many questions happening at the moment. And what we tend to do is we go into survival mode. And this is what we call inhibited grief. And very often this would present itself as physical ailments, like muscle stiffness, back pain, migraines, all kinds of illnesses. As I've mentioned earlier on, the physical and the emotional, they're not separate. So it is important for us to deal with these losses in the here and now. I've also spoken a bit about the collective grief, that we are all in this together. And I think on some level that brings me some comfort to know I'm not in this alone. Many of my colleagues are in a similar position. We're all going through this globally. This hasn't happened in a couple of hundred years where the whole world is impacted by something so tiny, so small, this COVID virus. The third component of loss is this anticipated grief. And this brings me back to that metaphor that I used, that this is not a speedboat, this is a long journey. And a lot of people wondering about, when are we going to get back to normal? When will I feel safe again? And this is what we call anticipatory grief, that fear of becoming sick, the uncertainty around it all. So I really want to illustrate here that when we are talking about loss during COVID-19, there are many different dimensions to it, and many things to consider. So Natalia, I don't know if there's any questions up at this point that we might address.
If you are wanting to pose a question, please feel free to do so at the bottom of your screen. You'll see there's a Q&A folder at the bottom, and you just type your question, that will come through to me. No questions for you just yet. I think we're all absorbing this this really intense slide here, this past, present, and future, which really captures, I think, where we're all at the moment. And I know just from myself working in the tourism industry how this grief has evolved, and our focus has been so much on just trying to survive, and now thinking about, well, what's going to happen in the future. How are my staff going to be impacted? How am I going to be impacted? Will I get sick? If I do get sick, will I survive it? Melissa's actually asked such a good question, and I feel it for myself sometimes. Is it normal to feel paralyzed, like I can't move forward?
Absolutely. I'm going to talk a lot about that. So, we're in a situation at the moment where purely on a neurological level, we are confronted with major stress. And what do we do when we are confronted with stress? What does the brain do? You've heard about this. We go into fight and flight mode. But more recent research has actually shown that the trauma response is actually much broader. It's fight, flight, freeze, that numbness. In some instances, it's just feeling really emotionally numb. So, absolutely, Melissa, your question is such a valid one. That just feeling emotionally numb. And that's why we shouldn't compare our experiences with one another, really, because it's so unique. Some of us hype up, we get angry. Others of us go into the more bluer emotions, the sadness. And others just go into that space of being frozen. So it is very normal under high stress. I want to talk a little bit about the past stress. So let's just go through these in terms of how do we actually deal with these losses. So I think from what I've mentioned in terms of the past losses that can be triggered, your triggers is like a lighthouse. It shows you the spot of your deepest pain, but it also shows you the potential for your deepest healing. This is the fascinating, the dichotomy that we are dealing with. That when we are working with the psyche, with our emotional pain, it is important for us to be aware of where the pain lies. Because if we can process and work through it, on the other hand, side, we find something very different. Something where we can grow, where we can expand ourselves. And really, if you look at this picture that I've got here, I think it talks a lot about these past losses that are triggered in the moment. Beyond rage, I think we've seen a lot of that kind of feeling in collectively, just a feeling of real frustration. And if we go a little bit deeper, anger is always a smokescreen emotion for something much more around, vulnerability and sadness. So for us to get through this, we have to feel it to heal it. One of the authors that I really enjoy, his name is Daniel Siegel, and he writes a lot about neuropsychology. And he's got a famous saying that you have to name it to tame it. That just giving a word to what I'm feeling already calms the central nervous system. And we are in such a precarious state at the moment that we really don't spend much time to just reflect on what is happening for me right now. And part of us getting through this, part of us healing, is to have that time to just be quiet, to go inside and to ask, what is it that I'm feeling now? Where is this coming from? So essentially what this experience is bringing us, it's either a moment of awakening or it's this reenacting of old pain. And we can go the unconscious route and just react on all these past losses that we haven't processed. It's also known as masked grief. And I think this is a very powerful image that speaks to that we suppress a lot of these feelings. And what do we do in that state? When we are acting on our previous old losses, we tend to lash out on others. We project our feelings onto other people. We dump on others. We act out. We rage. We spend. We engage in excessive behaviors. And why do we do that? We do it to numb the pain. And it's like that, you remember those balls that we used to play with in the pool? You can press it down, but what happens if you press it down? Inevitably, it's going to surface up. So we have to engage with the feelings that we are connecting with. And very often with this masked grief, people are unable to really name the feelings because they're sometimes very unconscious. And my, suggestion is during this time is rather become conscious of what it is that you are experiencing. And there's a fascinating study field in psychology called post-traumatic growth. They have found that a lot of people, that have gone through a lot, that very often with resilience, they come out stronger on the other side. But it does mean that we have to engage with these very difficult emotions. We live in a culture that does not want to engage. We want to numb. We want to do things quickly. We want to get through it. But this perhaps on many levels is actually pressing the pause button for us to say, what is it that I am experiencing right now? So I think people are also talking about different losses. And the question is asked, I'm going through this, but it's not as bad as someone else's, but I'm still feeling all these emotions and I'm feeling the guilt. And really what I want to say to our listeners today is that the worst loss is always your loss. That's an important principle to really internalize for yourself, that the worst loss is always your loss, and not to compare with other people. Another loss that we are experiencing in the present moment, and this is one of my research, I'm very fascinated from a research perspective, is what is known as the assumptive world. You see, we all have these beliefs about the world that actually help us get through life every day. These assumptions that we hold, they relate around the world as a safe place. There's always order in the world. The self is worthy. And what we are seeing happening, and certainly when I look at what's happening abroad, and to some extent here in South Africa as well, is that whole worldview is turned upside down because the world isn't feeling safe right at this point in time. We struggle to find meaning in this. Why is this happening? And so very often when people go through hardships, when, for example, their businesses are in jeopardy, a lot of that is personalized. And it's exactly with these assumptive worldviews, when they are turned upside down, this is where the trauma lies. Because we have to reconcile with a world that for a while isn't going to be safe. I'm hearing a lot of talk that we need to walk around with masks and the social distancing and all that. So our fundamental beliefs are being challenged at the moment. And that's often where the stress lies, the trauma lies. How do we deal with this? This you've heard about, 5 stages of grief. I just want to say that I think, a lot of people oversimplify these stages. It was never meant to be prescriptive. So they're definitely not linear. So it's not, I go through the one stage and then the next. And some people would say, but I never felt the denial. I never felt the anger. These stages were never meant to be prescriptive. They are descriptive. They describe common trends of what people experience. So if we look at how we deal with common loss, there is the first stage of denial that we all can see. And let me give you some examples of that. So at the moment with the loss, denial might sound like this. This thing is all overblown. This is a media circus. This is same as the flu. I'm not old, so I can't be affected by that. That's all signs of denial. Very often when people start realizing the actual reality, often the anger then sits in. And I think this is where a lot of us are at the moment in South Africa. And the moment that we look at anger, I think anger can be projected. We want someone to blame for this. And I think that's where often certain communities are ostracized. Anger might sound like, forget what they tell us, I'm bored, I'm going to go out, I'm going to visit with friends during lockdown. That's all part of that rage that we often see. We see the bargaining. This is when we often start acknowledging the reality, but we're not ready to give up our illusion that we are still in control. And this sounds like it's okay to spend time with others as long as I just wash my hands. This will all over be by lockdown. I think that, lockdown was obviously necessary for government to prepare for what's to come. But it also has a other side effect of the lockdown. I think a lot of people think, after this is done, we're out of it. And I'm worried about that. I'm already seeing in some of the shops that people are not wearing their masks and people are becoming more laid back. And I think that's also part of the grief response, just having had enough of this and bargaining. There's a stage that I think that we would see probably in the future when the death rate around this will go up. And this is that despair. And I think a lot of people are already feeling it in the tourism industry, where they're feeling very worried that we're not getting income. This epidemic is just completely destroying things for many people, feeling that they are at high risk of what's to come. And that despair, that's a very low feeling, for lack of a better word. It's very similar to those feelings of depression. But we also seem to get through it. And that's when we get to acceptance. And I think that's one of my big messages today is, as ironic as this is, for us to get through this abnormal situation, it really is about acceptance, where we realize that there are a lot of things that I can control, but there are a lot of things I can't. Tara Brach talks about this. She calls this radical acceptance. It's not about accepting in the sense of I'm giving it okay, I'm great, I'm happy with it. It's just saying it is what it is. This is reality. What can I do to cope with it? So let's chat a little bit about how are we going to get through this. I think I've sketched a picture now of just normalizing a lot of people's experiences and giving voice to what a lot of people are feeling. But what is it that we can actually do to cope emotionally, psychologically with this? So we are a society that's all about doing. I spoke about that pause button. All of us have to press the pause button at the moment, and we are forced to just be and take literally one day at a time, sometimes take 1 hour at a time, just because of the overwhelm with all of this. But if we think about the neuropsychology, the two blue dots that you notice there, that's the amygdala. And the best way to describe the amygdala, it's like those little alarms that many of us have in our homes, those sensors. And the moment that there's movement in front of the sensor, the alarm goes off. The fact is we all have our own inner alarm in the amygdala, and it picks up on danger. And I think what we are probably looking at collectively is all of our amygdalas are in overdrive at the moment. When that amygdala is in overdrive, it's all about survival. And it's difficult then to move up to higher parts of the brain where we can think clearly, where we can step out of the emotion. Many of my clients are describing the feeling of it's like an emotional tsunami that's hitting me at the moment. And I think that's a very apt description. But how do we calm the amygdala? How do I regulate my own emotions? There's so many things coming up that we won't be able to control, but we can absolutely control our response to the world. And I don't know if there are some of our listeners that have read the work of Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist that really went through the concentration camps, having seen his parents killed, and just really seeing the worst part of human evil. And at one point, when he saw all of this, he asked the question, how can I create meaning out of this? How do I make sense out of it? And really, he came up with this whole theory called existential therapy that says that we so often can't choose what happens to us, but there is a window where we can choose how we're going to respond. And I think that is where our inner power lies. that is where our ability lies to get through this storm emotionally. And just to also say that, if we are in a state of overwhelm, of numbness, of anger, that colors in the picture of the world for us. We see our world through that filter. And there is a new movement in the world. It's actually been around for a while. And there's such fascinating research coming from it called mindfulness. And mindfulness says basically that we are not our thoughts. Our brain, our mind creates all these thoughts. And what mindfulness teaches us is really to step back and look at the thoughts that our mind produces. The metaphor that I can use, it's like a taxi rank. For those of you that are up here in Johannesburg, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. It's busy. There's a lot of movement. There's taxis going all around. But those taxis could be metaphorical of our thoughts. And really, we don't have to get into every taxi. We can step back and notice it and disengage from it. So our mind will create a lot of thoughts that are anxiety provoking. Our minds are probably going to jump to the worst case scenario, and we will have the emotional experience of that. So with mindfulness, we get the opportunity to step back outside and notice the thoughts for what they are. They're just thoughts. It's not about denying reality, but it just says that I don't have to get emotionally swamped away with the feelings they produce. So this is a very busy slide, but it brings me back to that other point that I raised earlier on, that for us to really connect with ourselves, we have to give a word or words to our experience. And I invite all participants now just to have a look at what we have in front of us here. So this is the emotional spectrum, the emotional rainbow. On the left at the top, the red, these are feelings that have got very high energy, and they're pretty negative in the sense that they're not pleasant. Frustrated, nervous, apprehensive, annoyed, uneasy. There's the yellow feelings. So they have high energy, but they're more pleasant, feeling cheerful, lively, proud, optimistic. Green, these are feelings that are lower in energy, but pleasant, feeling chilled, relaxed, calm. And on the blue side, low energy and unpleasant, feeling alienated, excluded, etc. So I just want to invite our participants, see if there's a word or words that speak to you right in this moment now, as you're listening to me. Just maybe type in the chat box, what is it that you are connecting with inside of yourself right now? I don't need to get that screen up again.
Whoa, the screen
Oh,
is...
so what do we have there, Natalia? Sorry, I'm going to get it back on.
We've got frustrated, inspire, calm. We've got grateful. We have activity and service, relieved, worried, inspired, frustrated, uneasy, blessed, at ease, grateful, worried, drained, motivated, at ease. So it's very encouraging that a lot of them are in the green side. Okay.
And isn't it fascinating that we can actually experience multiple feelings at the same time? I can feel very blessed and grateful, yet there's a part of me that's feeling uneasy. So we as human beings have the capacity to feel different feelings at the same time. So one of the first kind of daily routines that I want people to really embrace is just to take that time, to give words to what is happening on the inside. I think it's such a useful part of mental health. We think we have this capacity to just do it, but it's really about reflecting on where is this feeling coming from? What is it that I'm experiencing in the moment? So just moving on, just going to get my PowerPoint. Yeah. I spoke earlier on about this whole idea of radical acceptance as part of a tool really for ourselves to get through the emotional storms of COVID-19. And how does that sound like? On the one end, we might be believing or connecting with thoughts. I'm stressed out. I hate this. I'm feeling anxious. This is horrible. I cannot get rid of it. I'm feeling very tense. I cannot relax. So when we can identify these feelings, we can step back and observe them. And really, the whole mindfulness movement is saying, accept those feelings for what they are with kindness and self-compassion. That's a very big part of, getting through this emotion. We have to be kind to ourselves. So how does that sound? Well, I notice my stressful thoughts. I'm separate from them. I'm noticing my anxiety and I accept it here and now. I'm aware of tension and I'm separating from it. So that whole idea that we need to separate from these feelings, otherwise we get so easily, caught up in that emotional tsunamis. There's a lot of talk about when we go through grief, the different types, past, present, future, about finding meaning. And maybe my thoughts around this is quite radical, but I don't believe that we can actually find meaning in the actual loss. There's no meaning to be found in this COVID-19, the virus itself. Loss and grief, all those that I spoke about, it's not a test, it's not a gift, not a blessing. It just is what it is. It's life. Life happens. And with having worked with many people over the last decade that have experienced tremendous loss and grief and trauma, that often seemed to be the least helpful thing for them to hear when people say to them, it's for a better good. Now he's in a better place. This is a test. You'll get through it. That's just not very helpful for people. I think meaning is actually found in what we do during and after the loss. We can find meaning in this. I think part of, if I can just, be vulnerable with you as well in this space, that part of me reaching out and finding meaning in all of this was to create an online grief group, and just giving a space for people where we can talk and share our experiences. But you will find meaning in a different way. Later on, as we end up our conversation today, we'll talk a little bit about, this situation at the moment provides us with the opportunity to dream, to create. I think if we're going to get out of this COVID, and we will, I think we're going to see a lot of greatness coming from this, in the sense of, artists creating new ideas, businesses coming up with new ways of doing things. So it was Carl Jung, my favorite author, favorite psychologist. He says, out of chaos, order will rise. It's the natural law of the universe. Out of chaos comes order. And I think we'll create meaning out of these losses for ourselves. We spoke about name to tame it, give a name to your feelings, and also hold on to this, let go of the permanence, because what our mind does, it tricks us to think that there's not going to be an ending. I think we know this, that this thing has got a beginning, a middle, there will be an end to it. History has taught us this. It's the cycle of life. So there will be an ending, and I think just to remind you of that can be quite useful. Let go of the pervasiveness that the impact of COVID is affecting every single aspect of your life. Well, if you step back, you probably would realize it does impact on certain areas, but other areas, not so much. A lot of people are talking about now how just spending more time with their children. They've never really had that. And that's been a positive for them. Other families are saying, oh goodness, can't wait for schools to go back. Had enough now. So people have different experiences. But the whole idea that it's not a whole life that's impacted. And I think there we have to take a moment to also acknowledge what is going okay still in my life. I still have my health, I have my family, I have the support of my community, and not just to focus on all the loss. To practice self-compassion, to be kind to ourselves. Trauma, loss does this to people. We take out those emotional books, and we're so hard on ourselves. We tell ourselves we should do better. We must do this. And, self-compassion, being kinder to ourselves, that inner critic to calm that voice, reaching out to others, more than ever before. I think even just this community with everyone together, already very supportive. And as I've mentioned, relationships at the end, be it professional, be it personal relationships, those are the things that get us through the storms of life. And then just to also alternate between loss and reorientating to the future. So what I mean by that is we should give a space in our day where we can really connect with the anxiety around what's happening, with the frustration, the anger. I certainly don't believe in Disneyland psychology where just be happy and smile. I believe we have to give voice to those more difficult feelings, but we cannot get stuck there. We also need to get into a space where we are looking future forward. We are making new plans, think about new ways of doing stuff, attend to the daily tasks, of keeping a home in place and all that. So also, this is not a time to make your home the battleground. Obviously, all of us are under stress, and I think couples, families can feel the tension, especially now, we're 4 weeks in. And certainly from my experience with clients, tensions seem to be high. Home cannot be your battleground at the moment. Don't make big decisions in your relationships. I think what's happening for a lot of people is they are experiencing the irritation, the frustration, and their mind is playing tricks with them. Understand that today you're having a bad day, not bad relationship necessarily. So I think now is not a good time to make big decisions around big life choices. Limit your triggers. You've heard this. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to be the broken record. We have to limit our exposure to media. I think initially we all had this panic and we were glued in front of the TV, but that in itself is just going to create more negativity for you. So you have to spend some time just catching up with what's happening in the world. Give yourself a certain time where you can do that, but limit this overexposure of media. What we know from psychology and how things go, weekends for some reason or another, and especially late evenings, that's when our feelings, our emotions can be especially hard and difficult for us to process. And so here it's really about that physical relaxation that it's going to be important. Have a cold shower or a hot bath for that matter, to do some stretching exercises and to step away from, very high stress work that needs to be done, just to help you also regulate those feelings. And I mentioned right from the beginning that our mind can take us to very, very dark places. And what we need to do is focus on what is probable, not what is possible. Our minds will create very dark scenarios, and chances are our biggest fears are not going to come true. That we are maybe temporarily, we have to deal with a lot of the stress, but long-term view, we probably would be able to make different choices. Don't personalize it. This thing that has happened with your business, with you as a person, the losses that you're experiencing, don't personalize it. I think that is assumptive world view. Remember that we are all in this together. Keeping the physical boundaries and routine. I think people have heard a lot about this in the media, that we have to keep some routine. I saw this on my Facebook this morning, and I thought it was a really cool thing to have. Those essential tasks that we have to do, we have to shower. I know some people that I'm speaking to say they've got 2 sets of pajamas at the moment, one for the morning and one for the evening. Clean one thing, one space every day. Tend to something, a child, a plant, be mindfully present, sing. This is a time to create as well. I spoke to you about the physical part of trauma. You might remember a few years ago with the Marikana massacre, they sent out all the psychologists and counselors to do trauma debriefing. And it was all about calming down, and just relaxing at home, sitting at home. And it turns out that was the worst thing they could have done. The PTSD levels were very, very high afterwards. And the question is, why did that happen? Well, it's by moving, it's by doing a bit of gardening, it's by doing a bit of dancing, bit of exercise, that we actually process trauma. Otherwise, the trauma gets locked into the body. So we do need to move. It is very important. And you can see that there's some other ideas as well. I like that second one. Do one thing to get your heart rate up. Yes, our body needs to awake. And as I've mentioned, this is a time to reflect, to create, to dream, to reinvent. Out of chaos comes order. And within every crisis, there is opportunity. And now is the time. I don't think we're going to have this time again very soon, where we can just really pause and think and dream about how can I take my business forward? What is important in my life? What are my values? What do I want my life to be about? We don't get time to really ask these deep questions. And now we have the time, because we're going to come out of this, and then we can make all these ideas a second reality, to put those plans in place. And at the end, I think we really are realizing this now, that at the end, we need to hold space for each other, and we have to bear witness to each other's pain. And you've heard this story of the spoons, that it's really about feeding each other, reaching out. One of the things that help people the most when they are depressed is to reach out and make a difference in someone else's life. That person who's been on your mind that you haven't spoken to for a while, you need to text them, give them a call and say, I'm thinking of you, how are you doing? Create those connections. And perhaps that's one of the meaningful things that can come from this, that, we realize that we are, in fact, interdependent. I'm going to end off with one of my favorite quotes. Chaos is not a mess, but rather it's a primal state of pure energy to which the person returns for every true new beginning. It is only from the perspective of the old form that chaos looks fearful. From any other perspective, it looks like life itself. And with that, Natalia, I'm done.
Wow.
So let's have a chat. Any questions? People are very welcome to contact me if they've got any questions or anything at my email address. But let's see if there's some questions or comments.
There are some questions and there are some comments that have come through. And if you, I don't know if you just want to put your email address up there for a little bit longer.
Sure, I'll do. Let's do that. There we go.
And we'll obviously just share that with everyone. But we do have some questions. If you are wanting to pose a question, the Q&A folder at the bottom of the screen, we've got some lovely questions. So Cherie has asked, for people who are going through this alone, how do you stop your mind from working overtime? Particularly, as you mentioned earlier, Fred, in the evenings and weekends when everything just seems so much worse and scary than it actually is. I know for me, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and then I just absolutely can't switch off. So how do you, when you're on your own, how do you stop your mind from working overtime?
I tell you, that question hits hard for me as well. I work a lot in terms of grief, as I've mentioned to you earlier on. And I've lost my father a while ago. And I think the most difficult part for me in this experience is seeing my mom all alone at home. And I've spoken to so many people that are by themselves at the moment that are really struggling, not having that contact. We are social beings. We need to connect. So I think two things important, when you are by yourself, is that you do need to keep that routine, because it's very easy to let go. And, when we let go of routine, psychologically time collapses and we don't know what's the beginning, middle, and the end of a day and what day it is. So just to keep that routine, and I think to also alternate in terms of how you're connecting with other people in your life. So this is not just about WhatsApping people, but actually to pick up that thing called a phone and to make that voice call, to hear a voice on the other line. Zoom and Skype and all that has given us some other ways to deal with it as well. So depending on where you're at in your life, I said right in the beginning, people are so unique and people have different experiences. if your energy allows for it, if time allows for it, why not learn a new skill, to do something, to create something in a time of chaos and trauma is so helpful. I use a lot of art therapy with my clients just for that mere reason that creating is a very, very healing way. So it's about keeping the connections, keeping the routine, creating, doing.
Kim's actually just tagged onto that and asked if sleep disturbances are quite normal during this time.
Mm,
She misses
yes.
sleep.
Oh, Kim, you're not in this alone, eh? Let me just say this to you that there's two common things that we see with trauma that almost runs through everyone's story. Often digestive issues, digestion isn't that great, and sleep disturbances. So again, the brain is actually quite dysregulated within trauma, and sleep is one of the first things to go. And look, it's a bit of a double whammy here. It is about keeping that sleep routine, sleep hygiene, because even for myself, I can see that my sleep pattern is out by an hour or two. Um, I would be very careful to go to medication for this if there's a need for it. Great, but the downside of medication is it can become addictive. So there are some wonderful apps that you can download. I think one of the most useful ones is actually Headspace, where it really is about that mindfulness that I spoke about earlier. How do I regulate my thoughts? Because Kim, I'm sure you'd relate to this when I say that your thoughts are just going over and over again. Um, Dreams, I see there's a comment there. Yes, very strange dreams that we are having. It's often because of those losses that are triggered. So try and get into a sleep pattern, um, and the whole idea of mindfulness, that I can step out of this repetitive, perseverating thought patterns. But Kim, is it normal? Absolutely, yes. This is what trauma does. This is what stress does to us.
So Dean's asked a question which I also find very relevant as someone who leads a team, and that is, it's fine to manage your own stress and be mindful of what's going on, but how do you deal with staff who are going through stress? How do
Yeah.
you stop yourself from being impatient because they're unproductive, or just to get them through this? What are your tips?
Mm. So I think any person that has to lead, that has to parent, that has to inspire, that has to manage, it always starts with you first, that you regulate your own emotions. Anxiety is one of the most contagious feelings. And when working with staff, I think it's very important that you are very conscious, very aware of what you are bringing into that space with your staff members. So it starts with self, to have a calm presence, a mindful presence. And when dealing with staff, it's really about giving them the facts. I think, to keep things hidden and them not knowing what goes on is perhaps even more distressing than knowing what the reality is and coming to terms with it. So, and I could imagine that many of you here would have to make some very difficult decisions. And I just saw one of the words popping up that really resonates: guilt, just really feeling the sense of guilt. Many of you would be in a position where you're very limited with choice. So I think it's about being honest, clear, transparent, and also hopeful to say, look, these are the options that we have going forward. Sometimes we will have the answers to it, sometimes we don't. And I think as long as we are open and clear in our communication, that can go a long way. But will there be guilt? Will there be anxiety? Let's just acknowledge that, yes, that will be present for many of you.
Craig had a tag-on question to that, and it was, how can we bring home to managers that they have a role to play in the identification of people who are struggling in this period? What would the first line approach be to try and put their subordinates at ease? So I guess there again, it's about making sure that the manager is in the right headspace.
Mm,
But how do you get someone who is perhaps not doesn't have natural empathy, for example, is managing a team? How do you
mm,
improve on them to at this time become empathetic and to help their staff?
mm, mm. I think, that's a big question, probably a whole lecture on its own right there. What I'm going to back to a point that I've probably made a few times throughout today is that relationships matter in the end. Empathy, I think, is a skill that we can learn. It's a skill that many of us are born with naturally, but it has a lot to do with just seeing it from another person's perspective. Empathy is not so much about having to, create a silver lining for someone. It's really about just acknowledging and validating people's feelings. And that takes courage. Empathy takes courage because I think we can feel so overwhelmed by how our staff might react, the fear and anxiety that they have, that we almost go numb. And we are now called into a space to be courageous, to be empathetic, to validate the feelings, to say, this is what you're feeling. And it makes sense to me that you're feeling that. So um, I see just Julianne says that I struggle with too much empathy. And it can feel overwhelming, to connect with people's pain. There's an author that many of you probably heard about, Brené Brown. She talks a lot about empathy and the vulnerability and the courage that it takes to really enter into the world of another. But just, I think at the end of the day, being not feeling heard, not feeling seen, and the struggles that we go through, it can be hard. I have to acknowledge, though, that in a leadership position, it is about a fine balance between being very empathetic, but also having to make hard decisions. So there's no clear-cut answer in terms of how to do that. But, there's also a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is, I feel all these emotions that you are feeling. And again, what happens then? We're not very helpful because now we're transposing our feelings onto another. So it's a fine balance. It's a balancing act between I hear what you're saying, I understand, and really listening. Not just hearing, but listening and validating those feelings. Now, more than ever, it's going to be very important.
So I'll take two last questions before we log off today. And I thank you so much, Fred, for all the time that you've given us. This has been such a helpful discussion. And also for all of you who've been vulnerable on the chat and lent in and shared how you're feeling. Ingrid has said, I try to control what I can control. And that's something I live by as well. But is that a good thing? Should I be trying to control what I can't control?
I can tell you this, that again, what this COVID brings us more than ever before is to realize that we don't have full control over everything. And that's the hard part to accept. It challenges our worldviews, our assumptive worldview. I'm in control. I can do all this stuff. I can manage it. Control is being taken away from us, not out of choice, but because of the circumstances. We essentially live in three places in our head: the past, the present, the future. How does the past look like? If I, go back to the past, things were so great. Hey, that's where depression lies. Future, a lot of anxiety. The present moment is where we find peace. What we do when we focus on the stuff that I can't control is that we are just hyping up that anxiety. We're just feeding that right there. So I think it was Ingrid that made the comment. I think more than ever before, it's really about really keeping your focus on this is what I can do today. None of us here today. None of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, in a week from now, etc. Yes, we can plan. Yes, we can make provisions. Yes, we can dream. But that's fundamentally one of the biggest life lessons all of us have to grapple with, is that there are things that I can't control, things that I can. So let's keep our focus with that.
And finally, Kira, and I completely identify with this, Kira is in pure fight mode, cannot sit still, always moving, angry, and her partner is in flight mode, just sleeps, escapes, online games. So there's a big clash at home. How do you
Yes.
support a partner or family at that time when you're kind of at complete odds with where each other are, essentially?
Yeah.
Fight and flight.
Fight and flight, and the metaphor that I use for couples, the one becomes the rainstorm, wants to talk about it, let's get things sorted, let's move. The other one goes into turtle, just withdraws, leave me alone. Again, we see that as a stress response very often. The one thing I want to tell our listeners is that if you can't get the support that you want from your partner at this point in time, don't push for it. I said, home is not the battleground at the moment. Find the support somewhere else at this point in time. So many people say to me, I want to talk to my partner, but they're just not listening at the moment. Now is not a good time. So I think we spoke about acceptance a lot today. And that's another level of acceptance, that this is just where my partner is at the moment, that we have to work around that. And I think, as we move through this, we probably would see a change. But to confront and to try and solve this now, probably not the best time.
Fred, I cannot thank you enough. This has been invaluable, and for everybody who was on, we have recorded it and we will release it. There were some beautiful slides in there, Fred, that I think we're all going to print out and stick up on a wall just to remind us. I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for leaning in and helping us as an industry. It's been a particularly difficult time for all of us, and thank you to everyone who logged on today. We really appreciate your attendance and your participation. I want to just say from my side, this is an amazing industry. We will get through it together. We will. And I want you all to stay safe. I want you to stay strong, to fight those dragons with me, and we will get through it together, I promise. Fred, and to attendees, a lovely evening to all of you. I hope you have a full night's sleep. No insomnia and strange dreams. And we will catch you on our next webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Goodbye.